What's up, Slater Crusaders? Glad you're here. Take a little breather from impeachment talk here for a minute because there's other stuff happening in the world, believe it or not. The World Economic Forum is taking place right now in Davos. So this is when the world's billionaires and top movers and shakers, they gather in the Alps in Switzerland to tell you how you're doing it wrong. This is Walter Russell Mead in the Wall Street Journal. He said there's something inescapably ridiculous about a gathering this self-important. Certainly Marie Antoinette and her friends dressing up as shepherdesses to celebrate the simple life has nothing on the more than 100 billionaires descending, often by private jet, on an exclusive Swiss ski resort for 4 days of ostentatious hand-wringing about the problems of the poor and the dangers of climate change. This year, an earnest young aide at registration told me that to reduce the event's carbon footprint, no paper maps of the town were being distributed. One could almost feel the waves of relief from the nearby alpine glaciers at the sign of green progress. So we're flying in private jets, but no paper maps. Whew, thank goodness. Alas, there is a massive sea change. Really, no pun intended, that was bad. Let me change that. There's a massive change of tone going on at Davos because the world has been moving in the direction of globalization. And now it's moving in the direction of nationalism or populism. Not good if you're a globalist. I think it's just fine, but if you're a globalist, this is not a good trend. Here's a little taste of Trump's speech at Davos.
When I spoke at this forum 2 years ago, I told you that we had launched the great American comeback. Today, I'm proud to declare that the United States is in the midst of an economic boom, the likes of which the world has never seen before. We've regained our stride, rediscovered our spirit, and reawakened the powerful machinery of American enterprise. America is thriving, America is flourishing, and yes, America is winning again like never before.
Now, he's not talking about how great the world's economy is. He's telling everyone there how great America is, America first. Now, I should admit, he wasn't all America first. He did say that America is signing up for the Trillion Trees Initiative. Whatever that is, sounds dumb, but a major part of the globalist vision is climate change. So Trump threw them a bone a little bit, like, okay, we'll plant 1 trillion trees or whatever that is. But climate change, by the way, makes a lot of sense if you're a globalist. Right? That's why those things align very nicely together. If you want the world to lower its carbon emissions to prevent us from drowning or burning up or whatever the latest claim is, then you need massive shifts of power from national governments to global institutions. Actually, I should switch that around. If you want massive shifts of power, that's the point. Actually, I got that backwards. If you want massive shifts of power from national governments to global institutions, then climate change is perfect. That's your bag, right? Because you're like, oh, well, we need global treaties and global initiatives, and we got to bring everyone together. Yeah, that's it. That's a global warming. Really, it's a bad thing. Got to bring everyone together, right? That's what it's all about. It's about propping up these global institutions. Yesterday, follow the money and the power, always. Yesterday, or a couple days ago, we talked to one of the editorial board members of the Orange County Register here in Southern California about homelessness in California. And she's like, don't fall for all this. It's all about money and power. It's a government-caused problem to get more money and power. And it's very simple. Homelessness gets worse. So politicians come out and say, hey, you got to pass this multi-billion-dollar tax increase. And the voters naively do it every single time. And then the politicians give billions of dollars to developers to build apartment complexes for low-income or homeless people at $700,000 a pop. And then they kick back some big money to the politicians' campaign funds. It is a beautifully corrupt system, right? It's so clear, it's so obvious, and it's so corrupt, and it's all for money and power. So is all this global warming nonsense to the folks at Davos. There's no true believers there, right? To quote Glenn Reynolds, he says, I'll start acting like global warming is a crisis when the people who keep telling me it's a crisis start acting like it's a crisis. And I mean more than not using paper maps or plastic straws. Which brings us to Greta. Now, not gonna go into a whole Greta analysis here of how the left holds her up as a type of human shield, shielding them from any criticism or questioning. Oh, but the child, listen to the child. How dare you attack the child? We don't have time today for Nassim Taleb's analysis of pedophistry, which is when you make an argument for the children. You hold up the poor and the defenseless children, and you do that to prey on people's maternal and paternal instincts to get them to suspend all critical thinking. Not gonna do any of that. But here she is scolding you. Now she starts off saying, she's like, I was here last year telling you that our house is on fire, and our house is still on fire. Here she is.
We don't want these things done by 2050, 2030, or even 2021. We want this done now. Unlike you, my generation will not give up without a fight. The facts are clear, but they are still too uncomfortable for you to address. You just leave it because you think it's too depressing and people will give up. But people will not give up. You are the ones who are giving up. I wonder, what will you tell your children was the reason to fail and leave them facing a climate chaos that you knowingly brought upon them? That it seemed so bad for the economy that we decided to resign the idea of securing future living conditions without even trying? Our house is still on fire. Your inaction is fueling the flames by the hour. And we are telling you to act as if you loved your children above all else. Thank you.
And then everyone applauds. That's the weirdest thing is when people applaud that, right? She's like, you are all terrible people. Thank you. Yeah, we're terrible. Great job. Like, what is up with that? Plus, that's pretty meta too, right? So you have the kid being propped up to shield the activist behind her, to shield the activist of criticism, but she herself is holding up children as a shield to criticism. Act like you love your children. I want to end here with a clip of Jordan Peterson. I think it's self-explanatory. He's asked a question about climate change. Start here.
So what is your advice to young people when you talk about you need to be individually responsible, but when there are things that are so far out of our control, like climate catastrophe, like the precarious job economy, like the economic crisis,
out of your control as you think.
What is your answer to
Do you think
people
that you're
who are
worse
facing
off
these
than
questions?
you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off than your grandparents?
The argument, I think, is that individual responsibility does not change the climate, does not fix the problem that needs global collective responsibility. So I think that's the core of the question. Do you have a theory about that?
Well, fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives and starting to build themselves up as more powerful individuals. And if they're capable of doing that, then they're capable of expanding their career. And if they're capable of expanding their career and their competence, then they're capable of taking their place in the community as effective leaders. And then they're capable of making wise decisions instead of unwise decisions when it comes to making collective political decisions. I'm not suggesting in the least, and have never suggested, that there's no domain for social action. I'm suggesting that people who don't have their own houses in order should be very careful before they go about reorganizing the world, which happens in many ways. So, you can just
Get the plank out of your eye is the point there. There's so much goodness there, but the reason I wanted to play that clip is, did you catch the woman's face who asked the question? The other woman was like the confused, like kind of angry face, but the person who asked the question, and after that clip, she goes like this, she goes, no. That face is a posture of, I'm not changing anything in my life. Don't tell me what to do. Same attitude from people in Davos. Same thing. Global warming, this isn't my problem. I'm not going to change anything in my life. It's because, the cop-out is because it's bigger than me. It requires world governments to change. It requires massive action. Action so big that me flying my private jet to Switzerland, that's not the issue. It's bigger than me. That's the posture of that face. Here's the real clip I wanted to play.
If a young person believes that the climate, the global warming problem on the climate is something that needs to be tackled quickly, and they can't wait until they grow up and become prime ministers to do it, do you think collective responsibility overrides individual responsibility in a huge issue like that?
No,
Okay.
I don't. I think generally people have things that are more within their personal purview that are more difficult to deal with and that they're avoiding, and that generally the way they avoid them is by adopting pseudo-moralistic stances on large-scale social issues so that they look good to their friends and their neighbors.
Welcome to Davos. Coming up next, we haven't had a chance yet to talk about the Second Amendment rally that was in Virginia. We're going to do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back. Read an article in the Yale Daily News, it's the student newspaper at Yale, about political diversity, or just diversity of campus professors. And when people talk about diversity, of course, they ignore political diversity. It's all about skin color. So they asked a bunch of professors there what they think about it. And here's a few quotes. Here's one professor. Yale talks a lot about diversity, but basically all that diversity means here is skin color. There's no diversity here when it comes to politics. The liberal point of view is taken to be objective, not an opinion, not a set of beliefs, an objective fact. There's an assumption that goes unquestioned that if you're not a part of the herd groupthink, then there's something wrong with you. There's a mathematician there, David Galertner. He has this great video, maybe last year, about him questioning evolution for the first time, and it's brilliant. You should look that up. Mathematician, he says, if Yale chose to be intellectually serious, it could hire them all, or all the conservatives meaning, or all the conservatives that have interesting things to say, and it would make Yale not merely one of the top dozen top colleges, but one of the most intellectually seriously elite institutions in the country, and a worldwide phenomenon. Sorry, I butchered that, but the point here is how fascinating that if Yale chose to be intellectually serious, if they chose to be, as like Yale's ranked #1 or #2 school in the country for the last 50 years. And here's a math professor saying, well, if they ever chose to be intellectually serious, implying that right now they're not, the #1, #2 school in the country, not intellectually serious right now. And that's probably right. So I'll give you an example here of a topic today where there would be zero intellectual curiosity on Yale's campus. A topic today where, back to that first professor, there's an assumption that goes unquestioned that if you're not a part of the herd groupthink, then there's something wrong with you. If you believed what I'm going to share right here, then you would be thought on Yale's campus as something is wrong with you. The Second Amendment rally in Virginia that happened on MLK Day. 22,000 gun owners, I think that was the latest number, 22,000, brought all their guns, or as many as they could carry, wearing tactical gear, the whole thing. No issues, no fights, no arson, no flipping cars, no looting, no breaking windows. There's video out there of people walking around with garbage bags telling everyone to pick up trash. This is Chad Felix Green. He says, when there's left-wing rioters who burn cop cars and smash windows. The media says there's a peaceful, courageous demonstration going on now. They're all joined in solidarity against oppression. But when we have peaceful pro-Second Amendment advocates gather with signs, we're reporting here, Dave, from the front line, surrounded by militant extremists. And that's how this is all portrayed leading up to it. Check out this montage. This is media coverage before the event.
Right now, thousands of gun rights activists, white nationalists, militia groups, all swarming the Virginia state capitol.
There are a lot of people nervous about what's going to happen.
Authorities in Richmond are on high alert.
It could be a tense day.
Such polarization, what may happen in Virginia.
Several hate groups, supposedly some white nationalists.
White nationalists.
White nationalists. White nationalists.
White nationalist groups.
White supremacists.
White supremacists.
White supremacists. White extremists.
This entire rally stands in opposition to the meaning of this day.
Virginia on the edge.
How concerned are you that there might be some people in this crowd that may want to get violent?
There's certainly a lot of concern here.
Raising fears of a dangerous confrontation.
There could be violence, and there is real concern there about what the intention is behind this.
There's a lot of concern about the potential for violence.
Could spark violence. Tensions high in Virginia may cause violence there.
Northam clearly trying to avoid another Charlottesville.
In Charlottesville. Could see a repeat of what we saw in 2017 in Charlottesville.
Similar to what we saw in Charlottesville.
Worrying about a repeat of Charlottesville.
Horrible 2017 Charlottesville disaster.
You look at what happened in Charlottesville.
The two sides clashed in Charlottesville.
Men walk through the Capitol in Virginia carrying weapons of war.
Many demonstrators are, in fact, heavily armed.
Heavily armed.
Heavily armed. Look at the gear.
What is this all about?
Militia groups, armed militia.
These militia groups.
Far-right militias.
Militia groups.
Far-right extremists.
Look, those threats which caused the governor to call for a state of emergency have simply not emerged. The police very clear in saying that they have not had a single arrest during this rally.
Yeah, of course not. Of course there hasn't been a single arrest. I love the use of the word swarm. I love anytime when the media, there's an event like this going on, and everyone in the media picks up the same word to describe it. And swarm is one of those words, right? Whenever you have progressive protesters doing some rioting, they're never described as swarming. But when it's pro-Second Amendment people, they're swarming the Capitol. And every media outlet uses the same word. So many headlines with the word swarm. The buildup before from the media was as if they wanted there to be major problems. They wanted there to be violence so that they could say, oh, I told you so. Look at these evil, terrible people. We can't let anyone have guns. These are the pro-Second Amendment people who are so safe with guns. And look at them, they're all fine. Like, they thought 22,000 people were going to get shot because the guns were just going to start firing randomly at each other and everyone was going to get shot. And think about, like, even just statistically, that's pretty wild that you had 22,000 people and some of these guys were carrying multiple guns. So let's say there were 30,000 guns and not one accidental discharge, not one finger pulled the trigger accidentally, let alone on purpose. And man, did the media want that to happen. We talked to a former NYPD police officer the other day, and I asked him what he would say to New Yorkers who culturally are not used to that, right? New Yorkers, when they see these guys with their guns and the whole thing, what would you say to the New Yorkers who are worried about that or scared? And he said, yeah, their message is, their point is, the people in Virginia, having these guns doesn't make me a bad person. The gun isn't dangerous. Stop trying to take away my guns and pretend like you're solving a problem, as if you're making everyone safer. Look at all these guns, and the trigger wasn't pulled one time. It's not the guns. I forward you again to the church shooting in Texas, when not only did Jack Wilson pull his gun and shoot the guy in the head from 30 feet away with one shot, but like 8 other people in the congregation pulled out their guns and didn't fire, but they were ready. Those guns have been there every single day, or every single Sunday. Those guns have been there. Never once went off on their own. There was a local Virginia reporter who sent out this tweet, big groups of heavily armed men arriving in Richmond with camo and tactical gear and body armor and all this stuff. And he put a picture of these guys. They're pretty young, right? Like late 20s, early 30s. These guys with their guns and the camo and the whole thing. And we're supposed to be scared. Right? We're supposed to see that and be, oh, this is so terrible. I saw that. I saw those guys and I said, nice. a well-armed militia. Looks great. I want to be on their team. When it hits the fan, I want to go on their team. When the zombie apocalypse hits, you know where I'm going. And you know what? I know where that reporter's going too. David Rothschild, he's some economist guy. He said, the white men, and they're all white men, because non-white men would not be safe in this crowd, are explicitly terrorizing us to demonstrate to lawmakers that they will cause more terror if they pass gun safety measures that the voted wanted and voted on to put them in office, blah, blah, blah. So you're talking about the white men, right? They're all white men. No white men would, non-white people wouldn't feel safe. So people are sending them pictures of black people at the gun rally. People show all these pictures of, oh, well, how about these people? How do you account for these white supremacists, I guess? You know, Martin Luther King Jr. applied for a gun permit. Government didn't give him one. Government denied him his Second Amendment right. So I bring all this up again because this is an interesting academic discussion that could never take place. It would never be allowed on a college campus now. You wouldn't be allowed to have it. And in particular, the role that the Second Amendment played in the civil rights movement. I could share tons of stories like this. I'll just pick one. The KKK in Monroe, North Carolina. They had 7,500 members. This was in a town of 12,000. And they were planning to go to the NAACP president's house and kill him. But a bunch of black people with guns surrounded the NAACP president's house. One Klan member drove by, fired his gun at the house, and all the people there protecting it fired back. And from that point forward, the chief of police required a permit for all Klan meetings. Good thing they were there to protect. I'll give you a counterexample. The Rosewood Massacre, 1923. Mostly black, super small little town in Florida. There was a rumor that a white woman was assaulted by a black man. So a white mob from a nearby town took matters into their own hands. They went to this guy's house, shot the dog. His mom came out to the porch. They shot her. And then they killed the guy who they thought raped this woman. The next day, 200 more men joined this mob, and they literally destroyed the entire town. They killed all the animals, they burned down all the buildings, and they killed 8 more people. The whole town was gone, the town was abandoned after that. So, choose your own adventure. Pick your own course of action. The Second Amendment, there's a great clip, so I don't have it here, but of Condoleezza Rice talking about her dad. Talking about her dad and how the black people in her community got together with their guns, stood out front of their houses to protect themselves. It's Condoleezza Rice, this ain't ancient history. The Second Amendment was incredibly important to the civil rights movement. And today, when you pass gun laws, it hurts the people who are in the most dangerous areas of our cities, mostly, who are mostly people of color. So you're just hurting low-income people of color the most. I mentioned that church shooting. This is a video of Jack Wilson. This is that guy who took down that murderer. I'll say it again, because it's unbelievable. Single shot to the head from like 30 feet away. Here's what he says.
Without the Second Amendment, my opinion, very strongly, you will lose all other rights. The firearm is not the evil thing. The person behind it is either good or evil. It's not a firearm issue. It is a person issue.
The Second Amendment is there so you can defend your other rights. Dare I say your other civil rights. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We talked a lot a couple months ago when this first came out, and it keeps coming back. And it's important to keep talking about it because it doesn't just live in its own little thing. They also created a curriculum around it, so it's going to live on in your kid's school. and brain moving forward. So we're going to keep talking about it. It's the 1619 Project. Do you remember this? The 1619 Project with the New York Times? So the goal of this thing was to redefine America's founding away from July 4th, 1776, and redefine America's founding as 1619. And that's when the first slave came to America. There's a ton of backstory behind what really happened, but we'll go with it. 1619, first slave came to America. So the goal of all of this, the big picture goal, is to prove that America is rotten at its core. That America is rotten, evil, and immoral at its core and at its very founding way back to 1619. And therefore, everything we've ever done since then is evil as well. So again, it wasn't just a feature in the New York Times, they've turned it into a curriculum. So it will live on forever. Now, in the project and in the curriculum, there's no mention of Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King Jr. Weird, right? You'd think they'd mention the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Now, I wrote on Twitter the other day that I think within 10 years, that's probably 5 years, Martin Luther King Jr. Day won't be a holiday anymore. Martin Luther King Jr. is going to get the Christopher Columbus treatment, because first of all, he's a reverend who preached the gospel, so you can't have that. And second thing, progressives say we must judge people by the color of their skin and never by the content of their character. And obviously MLK had the opposite message, so he will be erased from history. I know that sounds impossible right now, but it was, if you asked people in 1820 if we were ever gonna erase Thomas Jefferson from history, then they'd say that's crazy too, right? So, and he has been. So it will happen to MLK as well. Now, the reason he was never mentioned in the 1619 Project, and therefore not mentioned in our school's curriculums moving forward, is because MLK used our founding documents as one of the two foundational forces for civil rights. So first was the Bible, right? That's the first foundational support. And then the second foundational support for civil rights was the Declaration of Independence. In almost every speech and sermon that he gave on this issue, he references, and not only references, but lifts up Thomas Jefferson as a genius and an incredible man, and a man who took great risk in writing, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." MLK has this great sermon on about being maladjusted to society. And he says, people always talk about how it's bad, psychologists talk about how it's bad to be maladjusted to society. But then he switches around, he's like, no, it's good to be maladjusted against the bad parts of society. You get the point of that, right? He said, I want to be as maladjusted as Abraham Lincoln, who had the vision to see that this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. I want to be as maladjusted as that great Virginian, Thomas Jefferson, who in the midst of an age amazingly adjust to slavery, could scratch words across, so meaning like people were adjusted to slavery, to a bad thing. He could scratch words across the pages of history, words lifted to cosmic proportions, right? I love that. That's such a poetic, wonderful way of saying that we need to break free from our broken culture. Don't get adjusted to our culture. We have to be maladjusted to that. And then, of course, in the I Have a Dream speech, he said, I still have a dream, deeply rooted in the American dream. Deeply rooted, again, talking about the true foundational supports of his movement, the American dream. And he says that we will rise up one day and live out the true meaning of our creed, that all men are created equal. So to Martin Luther King Jr., Thomas Jefferson is a good guy, right? Martin Luther King Jr. uses him as the foundation of the civil rights movement. But the 1619 Project says no. Thomas Jefferson was a bad person. A bad person. And 1776 was a bad thing. Right? They say the Revolutionary War in the 1619 Project, they say that the Revolutionary War was fought because our founders wanted to perpetuate slavery forever. And here's Martin Luther King Jr. saying, no, 1776 was about setting a foundation that would ultimately lead to this moment right now in the 1960s when we can bring in not only the end of slavery, of course, but in true civil rights. So they're completely conflicting messages, which is why, of course, they don't mention Martin Luther King Jr., and which is why, of course, Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy has to go. So one reason why we keep bringing this all back up again is because there's a group out there that has been interviewing these historians. This group's been interviewing some of the top historians in America and asking them their thoughts on the 1619 Project. Now, I read one of these first interviews with a historian, I think it was a historian at Princeton, and I was like, gosh, this is a good interview with really good questions. And it's fascinating that these historians would say yes to this interview and spend so much time. These are like hour-long interviews. So I was reading along and I was like, geez, who did this? So I scrolled up to the top. The World Socialists. the World Socialist website is doing these interviews. And they're fantastic. So kudos to them, I guess. I never thought I'd say that. But recently, they sat down with Claiborne Carson. He's a historian at Stanford. He's the director of the Martin Luther King Jr. I think it's called the Research and Education Institute. He was chosen by MLK's wife to lead that center and to oversee his papers, right? So pretty first-class, top-notch guy. He's also was one of the historical advisors for the PBS documentary Eyes on the Prize, which was all about the civil rights movement as well. He was never consulted about this project, about the 1619 Project. He said it wasn't an honest academic endeavor. They had a very specific agenda that they wanted to get out. They certainly didn't want to talk to anyone who might disagree with what they had to say, or even ask proper questions about what the agenda is that they were trying to get out. So why was he not included? He has a online program called the Liberation Curriculum. And he says in that, he says, one way of looking at the foundation of this country is to understand the audacity of a few hundred white male elites getting together and declaring a country based on the notion of human rights. Now, this is the key line. He said, obviously they were being hypocritical, right? Because they still owned slaves. But it's also audacious. This professor wasn't included in the 1619 Project because how dare he say anything positive about our founding fathers? Even though he acknowledged that they were still hypocrites, he still called them audacious. He still gave them credit. And we can't have any of that. Also, the 1619 Project, and just progressivism in general, is all about being a victim. And this scholar, he frames history as proof of your sovereignty, at least in America, and also your opportunity. He says that he teaches kids that you are right bearers and right declarers, which is very different than the left today. The left today says you're all helpless victims. So there's no room for MLK, there's no room for this professor either. Quick 30-second here. It's worth this reminder. You get this, you know this, but we need to set a reminder here, always. The Declaration of Independence. The left dismisses it because they call the people who wrote it hypocrites. But what those hypocrites did, our founding fathers, is they set a standard. And what that standard did is it set a contradiction, right? It said, here's where we are, here's where we need to be. And that contradiction, that distance between, is where and what we need to improve. And in the grand scope of history, it didn't take long, actually. And again, 1619 Project says that the Revolutionary War was fought to perpetuate slavery and to continue it forever. That's ridiculous. The Declaration of Independence set up a contradiction. And here's what that professor says about that contradiction. He said, it's wonderful to concentrate on that contradiction because that to me explains Frederick Douglass. It explains King. What all these people were united on was to expose that contradiction. And we should always keep exposing it. The contradiction between the self-image of the United States as a free and democratic country and the reality of where it's not. And if you're a black leader, your job is to expose that contradiction. If you go through a list of all the great orations in African-American history, nearly all of them focus on that. They want to expose and use that contradiction. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. did. He used the Declaration of Independence in all of his main civil rights speeches to make that contradiction clear. Do not let the progressives get rid of this declaration. That's what they want to do. What a tragic mistake that would be. Because if they're successful, now what's the standard? What will future oppressed people use as their foundation to declare their rights? These progressives who want to rewrite our history, and that's what the 1619 Project is. They want to rewrite our history. They're also rewriting our future. They want to take us back, in the name of progress, they want to take us back to a time when men were not considered free. They say they're taking us to a higher place by getting rid of the Declaration and its truths written by hypocrites. But they're not taking us to a higher place. They're teaching our kids absolute revisionist lies. Be very careful. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, there is probably no author who I read that I say, yes, that's it, thank you, more than Suzanne Venker. Suzanne Venker's here. She's an author and relationship coach. Ms. Venker, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
Does that make sense? Like, I'll read your articles and I'm like, yes, finally, that's exactly, like, I see the things you talk about. I see it out in my life. I see it in my circles, but I can't put words to it. And then I read your articles. I'm like, oh, bingo, that's it. Thank you so much. So I'm super grateful for you.
Awesome. Great. Glad. Love it.
You have a new article here, Never Marry a Feminist. And you're quite bold as well, Suzanne. What was the foundation of this article?
It's so easy to just get to the point.
Right, why waste time? So what started this article for you? Where did it come from?
Oh my gosh. Well, I had seen this new ad of a woman proposing to a man. And the reason why she did that is because she wanted to smash the patriarchy. And that sort of, it kind of went from there. And I was associating, I deal with this all the time. This is the stuff that I see all the time in my work, is people who are wanting to reverse roles to such a degree and having such a big degree and then having all these problems as a result. And whenever I see these articles, I'm just like, I got to tell you what's happening on my end. I got to tell you what I'm seeing and why this doesn't work. And don't be afraid of it. We have to deal with the reality of human desire.
Oh, so good. Okay, I want to get back to human desire. I love this line. Okay. You say, when it comes to love and marriage, couples typically fall into one of two groups: those who embrace tradition and those who do not. What are some traditions? How do we embrace tradition? And then what are some ways that those who don't?
So I always struggle with that word because people don't exactly always know what that means. But all I basically mean is that there's a reason why relationships have always functioned along traditional, conventional roles very easily. And that is because men and women are biologically different. We are not equal as in the same, which is what equality has come to mean. And all we have to do is look down to see how different we are. And those differences that we have anatomically are also up here in our head, the way we think, the way we behave, what we want, what we desire, what we need. And there is no attention paid to that. But if you are schooled in those differences, you're going to find your relationship to be very, very smooth sailing. And the more you are fighting against that, the more you're going to struggle. And with that particular concept of women proposing to men, and her reasoning for it was to smash the patriarchy, I was trying to say, look, if you're going to enter marriage already from the get-go with this attitude that it's a patriarchal institution, rather than understanding that it's really based on biological differences, you're never going to make it. That's the bottom line. Because your attitude going in is absolutely, first of all, it's not true, and it's also very negative.
What does that attitude do to the man in the marriage?
So a man's desire and need to provide for and protect his family is innate. It is that way whether it's 1919 or 2019, or I guess we're 2020 now. I got to start saying that. So it doesn't, that doesn't go away. So just because we change as a society doesn't have anything to do with human nature. Human nature doesn't change. So a man's desire to provide is crucial to his identity. And when women don't understand that and try to reverse it and become the protector and the providers of the family, pretty much all hell breaks loose, because you're setting up a relationship dynamic where the man is more your son than your hero.
Wow.
Right?
Oh, sorry, I cut you off here. Let me. Okay. So you create a dynamic where the husband becomes more your son as opposed to the hero. Wow, that's so good, Suzanne. Okay, keep going, sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, who wants to have sex with their son or their mother, right? I mean, that's not how it's supposed to work. So the more you allow yourself to be cared for and protected and provided by a man, the more that sexual relationship is going to flourish. Now, this gets into tricky territory because people will say, well, how are we going to do that with the way the world's changed so much and women are working? And the argument isn't that women don't ever enter the marketplace. The idea is to understand, how are we going to marry, or figure out rather, how are you going to marry that new reality with the reality of human nature that doesn't change? We have to figure out, you have to figure out for yourself in your own relationships, in your own marriage, how to do that. All I know is that from my end, for like all of my coaching sessions have the same underlying problem, that they entered marriage thinking that sexual equality was real. You know, equality meaning sameness or interchangeability between the sexes. And they proceeded accordingly. And after so many years have gone by, give it maybe 10 years, they have the kids, of course, and they're moving on with their relationship, and it's changed because they haven't allowed this traditional, what I'm using as a traditional dynamic, to flourish.
Okay, so amazing. So you mentioned a man's desire to provide and protect. What's the woman's desire?
So a woman's pretty much and again, this is a generalization. There's always exceptions to the rule, and I'm always hearing about those exceptions. I don't talk to exceptions. I want to talk to the rule. But, the majority needs attention too. Not all the minorities need all the attention. We need to focus on most people. And most people, most women, get their identity through their relationships. That's where they feel fed. That's why they intuit and they relate and they want to talk endlessly and they want to feel. And that's a wonderful thing. That tends to come out through, that's sort of separate from the issue that mothering is also, for most women, an inherent desire that if they're not going to feel it at 25, they're absolutely going to feel it at 35. In fact, it's usually right around the age of 30 when all of a sudden those differences between men and women become glaring, because prior to that time, we do live kind of parallel lives. We're both working, doing our thing, go to school. But right around that age of 30, the woman's going to have this uh-oh moment that a man isn't. And at that point, you realize, wow, the ability, our reproduction really does divide us. So it's really all about sexuality, sex between a man and a woman and desire and what makes that work, as well as reproduction. And if you focus more and understand how that works, everything kind of can shift about the way you map out your life and who you want to be with and how you proceed in the relationship. It's like a game changer.
Wow. Okay, so what about when you do have kids? You mentioned, I think in this article, or maybe one of your others, I'm putting them together. How does having kids change or reveal the dynamics?
Because the way you're going to parent, if you're a woman, is to mother, and the way you're going to parent if you're a man is to father. And mothering and fathering are distinct things. They're not the same. We shouldn't call it parenting. We should call it mothering and fathering. So a mother is going to want to hold and caress and take care of, and of course it all starts with doing that, right? Because you're physically feeding them from your body. And it just proceeds from there, where you're going to be, as a mother, more concerned with, oh, how's my little child feeling? Or, whereas the husband's more about rough and tumble play and, get up if you get hurt and move forward. And there's just a whole different way of of doing things. And then on top of that, women want to work less once they have children, and men want to work more. I mean, when you have a child, your first instinct is to, oh my gosh, I got to take care of this child. I got to figure out money-wise how I'm going to protect them and provide for them. A mom's first instinct is to take care of him emotionally. You know, how am I going to do that? So again, right away, you're already thinking differently about your work-life balance, all those things you were thinking about prior to having kids, differently once the kids come along. That's why you see women pulling away from the workforce once they have kids, and men don't do that.
Which feminists say is a bad thing. This is one reason why I love you writing so much is because you embrace these things, right? You embrace these things that we know are true, that we're told we need to run away from. And you're so right. Let me ask you this last question here, Suzanne, and I hope we can talk again and often. There's the lie from the left, from progressives, feminists, however you want to describe it, that if a woman were to embrace this traditional dynamic that we're talking about here, then they're taking the lesser role. Dispel that myth.
So that's really at the base of this whole thing, is the idea that the traditional roles, and once again, I need to qualify that by saying this isn't about strict traditional roles. This is about traditional-ish roles, you know, because the world has changed so much and there is so much overlap, which is fine. But to understand the main structure being in place is to understand how men and women are designed to work in complementary fashion or in tandem toward a common goal. But they changed it to be that having a separate role means less than for the woman because she's not producing an income, because for feminists, it's all about power. It's all about power. That's all they're concerned with. So in order to have power, the kind of power that they want, you need money and clout in the world. The kind of power that regular everyday women want is the power via their relationships at home. That's real power. And if you can keep those relationships strong via your family, via your marriage and your kids, you've won. As far as I'm concerned, you've just won. If it's all up in smoke, you know, you're never going to be able to get back. You're never going to be able to make up for that in the workforce, what you weren't able to do on the home front. So I mean, these are things that are never discussed, of course, by the folks in power, because they have a completely different way of viewing the world, and they sell a different message entirely, and it's screwing up people's lives.
Suzanne.
Yeah,
so
I want to come back. You're great.
Yeah. But this is my attitude when I read your articles. I'm like, oh, that's good. Man. All right, awesome. Suzanne Venker, the website is SUZANNE Venker, VENKER.com. Read them all, listen, speaking, coaching, all that good stuff. Anything else, Suzanne, that I want to promote here? Because I want to promote it all.
Thank you very much. No, that's about it. You've got it covered. The
Okay,
website
done.
has
Suzanne
it all.
Venker. Yeah, it's all there. Beautiful. All right, Suzanne, we'll talk again. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a great day. Amazing stuff. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.